I'm Chris Parr. I'm Vice President of Music Programming and Talent Relations for CMT, Country Music Television, based in Nashville, Tennessee. Our parent company is MTV Networks and Viacom. And I oversee the music programming direction, music direction of the network, as well as the talent relations and talent booking of the artists for all of our program initiatives. CMT is country music television. It's in 80 million homes domestically. It is a property owned by MTV Networks. It's part of the MTV Networks family, if you will, of music channels. We are basically consider ourselves the authority on country music, and we celebrate the stories and the artists of country music. Country music being a very kind of song-based format. Obviously, although we use a music video, the music video as the way to reach the audience with that song, it very much circles around the songwriter and the songs themselves. It's unique in that sense, we think. And so we like to say that we celebrate the song. Celebrating the song is a philosophical point of view, if you will, but it's a filter or a mission statement that we have, because so many things in country music come back to the song itself. You know, the music video is a derivative of the song. It wouldn't exist. The creative process that happens to create a music video that we play in our music mix versus a country radio station, obviously you've got another layer, a more extensive layer, if you will, of creativity that goes into making these visuals that go with the song and tell the story. And sometimes those visuals match the song to a T. Sometimes they could be completely different. You know, that's part of the challenge of the artist, is to interpret that. It's an extension of their art, their songwriting, or their performance of those songs. And obviously you get in the music video medium and they have another avenue to explore how they express that to the audience. We're very much music based, but we also, when I say tell the stories of country music, we have documentaries, we have all types of programs beyond just the music programming mix, where we might celebrate, we celebrated the life of Johnny Cash when he passed a few years ago. It was a tribute to Johnny Cash and featured a lot of different artists, that were obviously celebrating his songs and his body of work, if you will. So that's an example. We do documentaries on, recently done one on Southern rock. We have a series called American Revolutions, and it basically falls under that umbrella. We've done it on bluegrass, kind of analyzing how those genres of music have come to be where they are today. As overseeing the music programming and talent relations, I basically, really even in a long-form show, or a show that's not just what we call long-form is not our music mix, our music hours. So it's kind of we put things in two categories. And then within the long-form programs, an hour-long program, say, you're going to have, it could be more, I typically put them in two categories there, is it's either performance-related, it's a concert special or something of that nature, predominantly performance-based, or it's personality or interview-based. Those are large buckets, but it gives you a kind of a bit of a roadmap. When you look at if you looked at our programming, they would probably fall within one of those few buckets of definition, if you will. We really oversee, myself and my department, we oversee kind of our musical direction, what artists we're playing, what artists we play more than other artists, who's getting the most, if you're just looking at it from a purely music programming standpoint, who gets the most spins versus who gets the least, whether you even make it on the channel, if the music videos are, commercially viable, that we think it's something that the audience is going to be interested in. Obviously, we're tied to a lot of times how well that song may be doing. And of course, if you look at the radio charts and radio airplay, you'll see some similarities there because it's an emphasis of that artist at that particular time. And then also on the talent side of what I oversee, it's basically any interaction, anytime you would see the artist on the channel, on the network, it's coming through our department to reach out to that artist and basically book them for that television opportunity, whether it be a weekly variety show that we have or We have, we have artist-specific concepts that we're actually working on. We're doing some real development this year where we want to feature some of those artists in a little more non-traditional ways. It's what we're calling talent development, but it's really having them incorporated into an episodic, 8, 10, 12-week shows. We're not really looking for reality shows like some of the other networks have, but we think that there's opportunities to do things with them in that, kind of a different capacity. It might feature some music, it might not, it might just be personality. It just depends on the artist. So it's really steering those two things simultaneously to drive our business and drive our initiatives, our objectives. Alongside, we also have the channel also has, we acquire some specials that might be pre-existing. For instance, you might see the CMA Awards air on a broadcast network. There's one time that it airs, but we actually have a second window on it. We have a multiple airing window on it. So country music fans can see it. If they've seen it once that night, they can watch it again. Or if they missed it on broadcast, they can catch it on CMT as well. So we bring some of those larger franchises to the country music fans as well. Music programming process at CMT is, we basically are, we're interpreting for ourselves what it means to our brand, because we have it's a little hard to explain in a short sentence or two, but it basically goes back to what we believe our audience and what they show us and what they tell us they're interested in. We have a very dynamic communication loop with them through our online presence with CMT.com. So I equate it to the old days, and I was doing this before the web was really as prominent as it is now, and obviously that's become a communication tool, not only one way to the consumer, but obviously the consumer can tell you what they think as well. So, for instance, our music programming is very much influenced by the input that we get from our fans. You can call it my analogy is if you were at a radio station, and a music director 15, 20 years ago, not even that long ago, but if you were there, it's the equivalent of, the lights, on the phone lighting up when you play that record, We get the same thing now. It's just electronic through .com, and we get a lot of response. Our music videos, most of them are that we're programming on the network, are also available online, so you can see them on demand. What makes sense that if people are going online to look at them, then we know that they're really interested in that artist or that song. So it helps us to kind of steer our overall direction of what they might want to see. If you see a huge spike on a new video that you put on, online, it tells us that, well, maybe we should be playing that more often, on the air. The first step of kind of deciding, there's a whole acquisitions process that happens where, basically record labels make the music videos. The music video, in a perfect world, is an extension of an artist, of their art. And I think now, a decade ago, it was probably less so. I think some artists, you kind of have to grow up with it a little bit. And the music video medium's been around for 20 plus years, about 25 years if you really time it out. Really the early 80s was when it became, a creative format. So, in a perfect world now, you have artists who've been they've grown up in that environment. Some of our biggest artists in country music are in their 30s and, some in their 20s, some are in their 40s. But there's it's a bit of a generational thing there, and you see the artists who are probably in their 20s and 30s are more likely to use it as an extension of their art. It's a way that they convey their image and their personality. So we see those things. The record labels bring them to us. It's a function of the record company to create them. We try not to get too involved. We try to give them as much feedback as possible about what we think works and what doesn't, and we're interpreting that based upon what we know about our audience. And if you're reaching, over 80 million households across the nation, we have a pretty good bead on that, we feel like. So, but that process is very much like a record company would go and pitch a record to a radio station. It's a very similar process. They bring it in, it's an acquisition, we look at it, we decide, does this work for us? If it does work for us, do you play it, you jump on it immediately now and play it really heavy, or do you kind of start it out slow and work its way up? And then we look at the factors. There's a lot of things that we look at. I tend to call them the tea leaves that we're reading, because it's not an exact science. I mean, it's very much our opinion of what our audience is interested in seeing. But you're looking at sales for that artist. It's like, are people buying it? Are they passionate enough? It's a big indicator for us to see people actually purchasing things. And now that you're getting into, you've got obviously digital downloads and kind of more of it's kind of going back to the singles-driven idea of selling music, where the consumer can decide, well, I love that song and I want that song and I want it now. So we're I think we're really just on the front, the leading edge of that, where it's like you can see those, and we're seeing tremendous download numbers. It's obviously a new tool, and I think that's going to continue. I think most of the industry thinks it will. But you start to see sales. You look at, are they getting played at radio? Are people? My interpretation of that is less where is it on the chart, the radio chart, than what are the impressions? What are people hearing this song before we decide to play it on the channel, or we just feel so great about it and love it, and it's visually so exciting that you go, people have to see this, and you lead with those. So it can go either way. Sometimes if a video's kind of, you feel like, we look at it and go, that's pretty average, or we've seen that a million times, it's, we may let the song lead it a little bit more and let people have some familiarity from their radio station, and then maybe they're more interested in seeing it on the channel. So there's a tremendous number of variables there. I mentioned the feedback that we get from our consumers and our fans. Tens of thousands of streams a week once we make these videos available, and once they're on the air, we also have them available online, and so we can read that. It's like it shows us what they're interested in, and we can rank those. We try not to get too caught up in that from a crunching number standpoint. There's a lot of feel that goes into it, and you look at all those pieces at once. You're also going to look at what kind of press that artist is getting. Everything counts. We really do. We literally sit in our music meeting and lay out all this information and look at every piece of it collectively and try to make the best decision. And if you don't get it right, there's always next week. It's a weekly process that happens where you adjust your rotations and music play. No, the music meeting really consists of my department. We're actually very, as opposed to, and I keep making analogies to radio stations, because it is kind of the traditional way that music comes in. You decide whether you're going to play it or not, and it's like, in radio you typically have a program director and a music director, and they're making those decisions for the radio station. We take a little bit more of a committee approach, if you will. There is one person, one of my directors of music and talent, who is focused on music programming specifically, and he kind of is the point person for it, and runs the meeting, for the department for me. But we basically bring in, we have a couple of schedulers that actually make the logs and actually implement the plan that we come out every week. So they're really hands-on. So they're in there, and they're doing that every day in and day out. Everybody in our department actually participates, and my theory behind that is that, no one person's opinion should it's like my director that I'm speaking of is in his mid-20s, and, he's at a different point in his life than one of my other directors who has been in this business as a 25-year veteran of working with talent and artists, and she's married, 2 kids, soccer mom kind of thing. So obviously those perspectives you're going to interpret as the audience does. I think you need a breadth of people in that decision-making process that can represent different parts of our audience, hopefully. So you kind of don't get too much of one or the other, and you try to balance it out. And there's a lot of debate and discussion about what's good, what isn't good. Have we seen that a million times? Is that completely new and fresh? Man, I love that song, but that video really just doesn't do anything for it. Or, I listened to the record, and that song never really jumped out at me. Man, this video makes it amazing. It's like that's what you ultimately hope for, is that the video is this kind of it makes the song and the creativity of the artist, it just conveys another message, or it adds on to it so much that you're like, wow, people got to see this. That's what we hope for every day. So it's I hate to say it, decision by committee, but there's got to be one person that makes the final decision, because you'll inevitably get a stalemate of, half the room thinks it's, shouldn't go on, and the other half thinks it should play every hour on the hour. So but a lot of that comes from working together week in and week out, and you'd be amazed at how there are definitely debates about things, but there's a lot of clarity that come about that where it's just obvious. It rolls in and you're like, man, I don't know if that's ever going to be a hit at radio, or if it's going to the consumers it's going to feel like it's way too far out there for the audience or whatever. But we just look at it and go, we think that's brilliant and people ought to see it and people ought to hear it. And fortunately, we are in a position where we can go and kind of push that envelope if we'd like. The current playlist is usually about anywhere from 35 to 40 that are currents, but then you've got a whole, you've got hundreds of what we would consider recurrents, golds, primary golds, things of that nature, where you kind of you segment them based on age and the ultimate hit factor. So if you have a video or a video and a song that was multiple 6-week number one at country radio in any given time period, and we got tremendous response to it, it was just a huge hit, both video and song. Well, obviously, that time moves along. It's like, well, that video, that piece of music for us should obviously live on a more elevated platform than maybe things that just kind of came and went, that maybe weren't as big a hit or didn't have as much of an impact or whatever. So you've got to kind of rank your, you got to make sure that your recurrents, as we call them, that you're playing familiar hits that people love, that they loved 2 years ago, so why wouldn't they like to hear them occasionally now? And that's kind of that balance of, you can't be so current driven, and we're a very current driven kind of format. We really like to, CMT especially, we like to kind of lead the audience. We like to be ahead of it. But I know we gut check all the time to say, are we playing that Tim McGraw hit from 5 years ago, or Toby Keith hit from 5 years ago, or whatever? Are we playing that enough? And it's a constant balance that we have. We have a weekly music meeting, and on average we'll see anywhere from 4 to 6 videos on average per week, new videos that will come in that are submitted to the channel. And out of those, we might, depending on the week, we could find 1 to maybe 3 new slots. It's a constant, new music coming in, and then you've got to decide, well, what comes off, because it's a finite list. And that's part of the discipline of running a music programming and a playlist. You have to, if you want, you're like, I want to put this on, but then you look at your list and it becomes what's the weakest link discussion. Okay, well, we really like this piece. We added it 10 weeks ago, 12 weeks ago, 15 weeks ago, whatever. But we're really just not seeing, we start to look at all that data again, and we're really not seeing the kind of response that we'd hoped. And sometimes, our favorite pieces, we put them out there and we think, this is brilliant and everybody ought to see it. But sometimes your audience may not agree with you, or maybe they just aren't ready to, they're just not ready to go there. It may be that next song and single and video from that artist that they start to gravitate towards. But, we have to be we have to be realistic and honest about that feedback that we're getting, and sometimes we don't always hit it. There's things that we love that we think, man, they're going to eat this up, and then unfortunately you just don't see the response, and you're like, okay, we got to take that one off. We'll go play it in our car or at home for ourselves. But that's kind of the process. It's 1 to 2 out of maybe 4 or 5 on a weekly basis. Really, what you're talking about is the mechanics of rotating or the rotations of music. And yes, it is very much math based. You can only you've only got so many slots that you program. If a song's on average 3.5 minutes long, you've only got so many minutes in an hour. So how many heavies, how many lights, how many recurrents are you going to play within that hour? And it is very much it's a very scientific kind of here's the clock, and here's how these pieces rotate together. And as a consumer, the idea is that if I'm going to play you something, we as programmers, and this is very typical, radio would do the same thing, but if you're going to play the audience something brand new they've never heard before and perhaps never even seen the artist, so it's completely unknown, if we see it and think, boy, that's a great new artist and a great song that our audience should hear and see, the thing is you got to really kind of like wrap it. You want a big hit going into it and a big hit coming out of it, because the one principle about programming is that familiarity for the audience is key. People want to tune in and see their favorites. We've got to find that balance between, like, okay, how many new things can we play and where do we play them, and maybe entice them into something new, but wrap it around things that they're familiar with and they're big hits. And that's the constant. That's the way hopefully you keep people watching all the time. So the mechanics of a clock of an hour, and we actually have multiple clocks, so you don't see the same thing each hour, or you couldn't identify a pattern potentially. That a clock. So it's a very complex kind of algorithm where it's like, a clock will play, and then the next hour it's a completely different clock, and then the next hour it's a completely different clock. And I think at this point we've got 3 rotating clocks, I believe. So the combinations and permutations of that are pretty far-reaching. You're not gonna look up. You shouldn't look up and see it and think, wow, they played that same thing yesterday about this time, And you can do that. Ironically, it's actually very easy to fall into that trap of you make a clock, and kind of for that week before you make any rotation changes, it could seem very similar to you, or you could tend to see things fall in the same order. So, and there's scheduling software that's very specific to this task. You have to set up the rules within that software, but we tend to probably program more. What we call free-form programming is very much by feel and tempo and what are you going in and out of, as much as the hard mechanics of it. We don't break the rules every time, but if we think something's a creative way to do it, then it's up to our schedulers. They have the ability to make that choice. CMT plays we try to play a breadth of country music. One of the things that I feel very passionate about country music personally, and my philosophical point of view on it is, and the reason that it's a successful, very singular format, is that you have such a breadth of sounds, and there's such a range within what is considered country music. And you could probably ask 10 people on the street and they'd all give you a different answer. So to me, that's the beauty of it. It's like, it's not this kind of really niche oriented. If you think about, if you think about a rock format, it's like there's new rock, there's alternative rock, there's classic rock. It's like you can go down, it's a splintered kind of format. So you can, the consumer can find those splinters everywhere, but it's like with country, it's a pretty, everything has to fit under one roof kind of, world. You can always have, and the format also is very much historically, if you look at the history of country music, I call it a pendulum swinging. It is constantly moving. It depends on how fast it might be swinging, but it's like, you could be in early, in the last, I think in the new millennium here, we've been in a very much more traditional kind of slant. We as opposed to, it's why Gretchen Wilson and some of the more traditional kind of sounds that are popping out. It's one of the reasons I think Gretchen really came along and really got a lot of notoriety, was because she was very country and she came at it from a very kind of blue collar point of view. And there was especially the female audience out there, and country music has a tendency to lean more female in its demographic than male. Just a little bit, but it's very historically, if you looked at it, it's always going to, it could be some as much as 60-40, from a female to male demo split. We're a little more balanced. We like to have a more balanced because it's television. We don't want to be quite that skewed. But you see, it's kind of it's in this more traditional kind of slant, and you'll even see that with brand new artists that the record companies are signing, and you'll have that very traditional sound, as opposed to, early to, like mid 90s, wherever it's like where, Shania Twain comes out and she's, it's obviously a very pop leaning kind of sound or version of country. So that's an example in the last maybe decade or 15 years where it's like it's shifted. And, the thing that one of the litmus points is, to me, where the moment Randy Travis came out and he was singing, Forever and Ever Amen was the first single that he came out with, and it was just this big country vocal. At the time, before that, country music had been a little more pop leaning. The production was a little more, adult contemporary pop sounding. And here comes Randy Travis with just right down the middle, So it always corrects itself. It always comes back to that as it may get off in these kind of pop leaning sounds or migrating towards maybe other musical formats. Inevitably, one artist, one band, one talent will show up and be like, well, that doesn't interest me. I'm all about this, and next thing you know, it sounds like classic George Jones or Haggard or whatever. It's like you're like, man, where did that come from? And it kind of shocks the business back into, oh, that's right, that's real country music. Let's go back to doing that. So it's a constant swinging of that. I think it's a very long evolution. I think CMT is a very contemporary interpretation of country music. We want to have a broad approach like the music has. So we will play, and we've had great success, for instance, with an artist over the years, over the last decade or more, an artist like Alison Krauss, who's very much a bluegrass artist. But we have completely, she's part of the fabric of this network. She's that voice, Allison's voice, which is undeniably Allison Krauss in Union Station. But, she represents that, and it's a kind of a constant in our world. Even though Faith Hill or Shania might be doing something here on the other side that's very, maybe more pop-leaning at the moment, we kind of pull it all in, and we really, because we have the visual medium, I think we have an opportunity to, those pieces work together, they perhaps work together visually. If you just listen to them, and we're trying to maybe program just an audio, a radio format with it, it might not make sense to you. But that visual interpretation, because we are a visual format, gives us, I think, a little more leeway. It gives us a more latitude. You can't have a train wreck. You can't make these things. You can't force them together. You got to find out. You got to figure out how to make them mesh together. And you take that. Hopefully, you take your audience through a little bit of a process to get from one sound to the other. You can't just slam them together, because people will be like, "What is that?" Makes them turn the channel. But we're very much, and I think we want to be more on the leading edge of it. I like to say that we're at our best when we have one foot in tradition and one in the future. And we do that not only just with our music programming. We've just put a brand new Willie Nelson video on the last few weeks. And Willie's as much an icon, beloved figure of this format as anyone. At the same time, we want to embrace, the new artists that come along and kind of doing it with their own style, And Gretchen's probably maybe a great example of that, because she's brought that traditional sound back as well, in her own way. It's her own interpretation of it. She can also sing a mean, heart. She can sing Barracuda like you've never, blow your mind. So she's part of that generation where she's been influenced by all those kinds of music. But we want to keep it contemporary. We want to be relevant, to the broadest audience possible. That's really our objective as a television network, is to get the most people watching and enjoying the network as possible. So we try not to be too myopic about it and too narrow about our definition. And we invite people from outside the format. For instance, Sheryl Crow, Kid Rock. I've had Bruce Springsteen, tracks on the air. And it's really interesting, because even the country artist community will point out to us, and they'll say, "Man, we love that you're playing that. I can't believe you guys are playing that Bruce Springsteen." It's like, and not every Bruce Springsteen will fit, or every Sheryl Crow will fit, but they certainly, when they do certain things, they can be interpreted, and it comes back to that song-centric kind of world where we think, boy, our audience would probably be interested in seeing that. They may not want to see it as many times a day as they do, the new Kenny Chesney, but still, it's a nice flavor to throw in there. So we try to bring in a broad, scope of artists and music. I mean, the importance of music videos to the country format, I think, is it changed. A lot of people that maybe didn't grow up listening to country music, or find themselves searching it out. It's really an entry point. The music videos are really an entry point, because you have this very contemporary, if you will. I mean, they're using the same techniques and a lot of the same processes. The directors and the production companies are using processes that keep them on par or competitive with all music videos that are out there, regardless of if you're hip hop artist or a rock artist or whatever it may be. So, they certainly, that gives you an entry point. I think visually it gives you an entry point to maybe listen to the music when you might not have. You wouldn't, if you asked somebody, stopped them on the street and said, "Do you like country music?" nah, and it's like in your middle of Chicago or, San Francisco or something, you know, excuse me, they might, their knee jerk reaction might be like, no, I don't really like country music. I listen to, whatever. But then you ask them about, well, do you like this artist or do you like this artist? And they go, oh yeah, I love that artist. And a lot of times we find it's about because they have some visual impression, especially younger younger demographics. I think it's music videos for country music are an incredibly valuable for the imaging of these artists. Where country music is part and parcel of everybody's entertainment choice. You as a consumer, you're going to make a choice as to where you spend your money, whether it be movies or music or whatever. And it's like, I think it makes it competitive with the other things, and it breaks down some of those stereotypes. Some of our biggest artists today have grown up and been influenced by, their music has been influenced by the Joneses and Haggards and Willie Nelsons of the world, but they also grew up in a time where they were influenced and television was a big part of their world and other music was a big part of their world. They may have been just as influenced by, Bon Jovi and Bruce Springsteen and, Queen, as anything. And it's like, and you're seeing over the last, I think that especially this generation, some of our biggest artists like Chesney and Toby and Sugarland and, you go down the list, it's like, they've been influenced by that, so they want their videos and their visuals and their image to be, competitive with that. So it's a really interesting kind of time where it's a way for them to express themselves in that visual medium. It's like versus just this one-dimensional, you have to love country music to buy it for the consumer. It's like, well, no, take a look at this, Hopefully you capture them with a visual. If they're not fans of the music, that visual gets them interested long enough to maybe just give it a listen. And I think that's why you've got, some of our biggest artists are, they're selling out stadiums and selling millions and millions of records. The core country audience, there's a ceiling to that. It's like at some point over several, a few million records, it's like you're tapping into a bigger audience than just a country music audience. And I think that goes back to why is that important to CMT is like, well, that's the audience. We want to reach the broadest audience possible obviously through television. So, yeah, if you put a map on our theory is, and we talk about it a lot in our programming philosophy. If you looked at a map of the United States, we feel like there's probably, we would over-index, if you will, in the middle of the country. The coast. Not that we aren't going to program to them, but sometimes, I think if you looked at television in general, you're going to see that most television is made on either coast, New York or LA, and so it has that kind of East Coast or West Coast, interpretation or filter, if you will. We think there's great opportunity, and I think we've built our business of, and certainly we're reaching 80 million homes where there's an audience out there, and we happen to live and create this television in the middle of the country in Nashville, Tennessee. So it's our point of view is a little bit different, we think, and we think that's a great strategic opportunity for us, frankly. You just look at it with a little different take on it. I think, one of the things a trend we've seen in television over the last few years is a lot of these competitions on television. You're competing for this, that, or the other. And so if that's what the audience is kind of interested in, and you see these things being very successful, of course, we as a major network are going to look at it and go, well, perhaps we should have something like that. What's our interpretation? And we had many discussions about it, and actually started down a path that was pretty typical of a lot of other networks. But then we realized, the thing that we know or we believe about our audience and why we're different is that our audience really isn't. So many of those competitions. They're kind of mean-spirited, They're kind of like somebody's got to lose. There's some very kind of black and white kind of, and not that it can't be competitive. You can't have a competition and not have a winner and a loser, but it's the idea that it doesn't have to be this mean-spirited approach to it. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, so to speak. And so we've really kind of used that, and we look at that. I think the country music audience, the hardcore fans especially, they're very interested. They're extremely loyal to the artist, the country music artist. And they don't seem to be too terribly interested in a whole, a gossip column about them, or kind of the dirty laundry of it. It's like they really don't show much interest in that a lot of times. If you look at, for instance, one of the examples of that is, there really isn't kind of as you have all these magazines that are on the magazine rack, and you've got you don't really have a dirt slinging kind of country music magazine. You know what I mean? It's like it's all very much celebrates the artist, and not that you're not going to have some real world information or whatever in there, but it's like the point of it is not to kind of sensationalize whatever's happened to this particular artist sooner or later. And we don't do that on the channel. We don't do that in our news. We think that the relationship between our fans and the artist is a little more sophisticated than that, and they keep indicating that to us in various ways. So. One of the criteria that we have for an artist, whether they're independent artist or major label artist, I mean, obviously major labels are able to show us so many more ways that they're establishing and growing an artist. So that makes us feel like we're part of that process. That we're not just out there on our own on something perhaps or whatever, but can an artist do it? The one criteria that we have is that you need to have a nationally distributed, because what we don't want to do is go play somebody and then a consumer can't go buy it in the marketplace, and it's like, that's a frustration we don't want to really create. And it's kind of like, and also to some extent it's to protect people from going and throwing money at music videos thinking I'm going to be a star tomorrow. It's like, well, why are you making a music video? If you're just making a music video to get your face on television, then yeah, I mean it's probably not. The odds are against it. But the point should be that you are trying to convey your image and your music to someone and have them ultimately make a decision to purchase your music, and thus you can, there's a financial transaction that's happening there, or go download the track, or however people want to choose. Everybody's choosing different ways now. So I think it's really, we have a one of the key criteria we have is that you have to have national distribution, because we're a national network, that people can get it. They could basically go get it anywhere. So that's kind of, we're pretty sticky about that. And it's ultimately, I mean, could an artist decide to do something on their own? I mean, there's certainly, country music in particular has not had there's not been a history of a lot of independent labels within the format. They've typically been mostly major labels. Unlike, rock, for instance. I mean, a lot of the alternative rock, you got tons of independent record labels out there, and they make a great living, and they support the artists and the bands that they are promoting, and it works for them. But it's kind of atypical for country music and for Nashville in particular. Recently, though, I think over just the last few years, we've certainly seen some independents, some up and coming, as the major labels have constricted because there's such a dynamic change in their business world. They've had to kind of constrict their overhead, their business, the number of people they employ, the number of artists they sign. They've just had to be much more focused about it, and that has created an opportunity for some independents to come into the marketplace. So we've probably got more independents right now in 2006 than we've ever seen, and being successful. We actually, for our award show this year, we have an outdoor stage. We call it our pre-party stage, and it's part of the red carpet process. And it's a launching pad for a lot of our new artists that we believe in, but we may not have a slot for them on the big stage on the award show, because that's kind of reserved for the biggest artist, the most popular artists that are out there. It's what people expect to see on the award show. But the pre-party, it's like, interestingly, this year, 2 out of the 3 performance slots that are on that stage are representing, independent record labels are represented there. So I've always said, CMT, my music programming philosophy is, we don't care who you are or where you come from. If it's great, music, and it's a great music video, then we're going to be interested. It doesn't matter what label it has on the the album or the video. At the end of the day, it's like, but it does need to kind of be able. A consumer needs to be able to get it. So it's a little bit of, I guess, answer to that is a little bit of both ways, it's a digital revolution. I mean, it's changing the business model for the record labels, and thus, because we are, very much connected to that, because obviously the record labels and the artists are a big part of our business, a huge constituency. I think they're it's just a transition. Everybody's trying to figure out what the new paradigm is, and we're very interested. We're actually MTV Networks, which would represent CMT and MTV and VH1, to name a few. We have a new digital music initiative that we're coming with, very much an iTunes type of offering. And what we're trying to do is create a little less tactical. If you look at so many of the digital music services out there right now, they're very kind of black and white. You're just moving tracks around. There's really not much of an experience to them. We believe there's as music lovers, we think there's a real opportunity to kind of get back to a little bit of the principles of people lamented the demise of the vinyl and the album covers, and how you could sit and look at the great artwork and the information, and it's kind of not quite the same. It's not quite the same experience with a CD booklet that's this big, and that's been something that I think people have talked about a lot over through the CD revolution. And now now we're getting this digital form, and it's like, wow, it's updatable. You can keep it current. You can, it's like you can put tour links on there when you go out on the road and turn them off when you're not. And so much. It's so dynamic. And so what we want to do is have an immersive kind of experience where you can go in there and you can, you're not just downloading tracks and you go back to your emails or whatever else you were doing. It's like it kind of becomes more of a, I want to go in there, and then all of a sudden I'm learning about this band, and oh wow, that artist that I love, here's 3 bands that they say they love, and maybe I should go find, maybe I should figure out what those guys are about. I never heard of them. So it's really kind of that immersive idea. You're still getting your music, it's downloading in the background, and you get your tracks, but we just think there's a better experience there. So you're going to see that in the very near future. The digital world is a huge impact. I mean, just the feedback loop that we have from our audience through our .com world. We offer our videos, our music videos, the artist music videos. It's just another screen for them to see it on, is the way we look at it. We were, I think, very progressive about that. We've been streaming music videos on CMT.com in particular for many years. It's just, if people want to see it that way, if that's the way they choose to interact with the CMT brand, we're going to do it in a television linear fashion, as we call it, or we're going to do it on online. And then we've got new screens, because you've got such great technology happening with digital technology happening with telephones. We have partnerships right now with some key Verizon. I think we just announced one with Sprint. Some of the major telephone operators, cell phone operators, where you can stream things onto your phone. The new handhelds, the new next generation of phones are going to have video capabilities, so you can stream in information. Well, it makes sense that, and we put out already, and have been for months, maybe even a year now. We sent out a CMT News update where you can get the information. It's a little sound bite. It's about 90 seconds. We have that. We might have a performance from our online series that we have. It's a performance series called Studio 330, and we excerpt a minute of that or a minute and a half of that, and we put it on, and we can stream it to people's phones. Now, right now, there's only a few 100,000 users or end user subscribers, but it's just a matter of time as people upgrade their phones and update their phones, whether they'll be able to get it on the go. And so there's another use of the digital world in how we're moving our content around to multiple screens, and we have a multi-platform strategy for CMT and for all of our sister channels as well. The users of internet or .com, CM.com, I mean, it's actually very surprising, and I think it actually, when we first launched CMT.com, I guess it's 5 or 6 years ago. It was probably right around the year 2000, maybe 90, probably earlier than that, actually, probably 98, 99. We were out there, and it really actually helped dispel some of the myths about who's watching, this thing called country music television. And at the time, we were in about 40, 45 million homes, so we were trying to grow our subscriber base through the cable operators, and having that information and showing who was using it, And you had a myriad of users, and a lot of professionals, higher. The income levels are typically higher than average. They are our audience. They're very much consumers. They are. It's very likely to be a family. They have children. They have mortgages. They have cars. It's like it's in that. On average, we're somewhere in a mid-30 to 40-year-old demographic is kind of our middle, our median age, if you will. It fluctuates a little bit here and there, but if you had to put a number on it, it's probably somewhere 38, 39 years old. So those people have families and have, they're consumers, which is great because another constituency that we have for the network is obviously our advertiser base. So makes us pretty attractive in that regard. The talent relations side of our business is very much driven, it is very much driven by the music, new projects, things that come out. We very much work hand in hand with the record business, with the industry. Artists are typically motivated to do things and want to make programming and specials, and they have a story to tell because they go through this creative process on a periodic basis where they go in the studio, they write or co-write with other creative people, and then they they go in the studio, and it's like it's kind of it's very a bit segmented as far as like how that process works, and then the end result, obviously they pour their heart and soul in these albums, and the end result is this record, and then it's like, okay, now time to go out and promote it. Country artists in particular spend a tremendous amount of time on the road. They tour constantly, so it makes our talent relations even a little more challenging because they have to make this choice a lot of times between we need them somewhere on Wednesday, in a studio or on location or something, and they're like, okay, do I take this money to go play this gig, or do I forego that because being on CMT is going to help accelerate or expand my career or maintain my fans? It's like those are all things that they have to weigh out. The talent relations or the talent booking process that we have at the channel is very much, we're looking at, as we're always looking at, well, who are the artists that the audience most wants to see? Who's most popular? Who has something to say? What artist is really passionate about a project? Not so long ago, Kenny Chesney had a record that was very close to his heart, which was very much about where he spends his off time, which is the islands, and he created a whole record around it. And although he had another studio record coming later that year, he said, I want to put this out there, and his record label accommodated him to say, what, we want you to do that. It's a creative outlet. And so we, just in the room next door to us, we created a special that was very much about that project and what him talking, to the audience and playing some songs, kind of stripped down, and really conveying how he came about, making this record. And that was something he felt very passionate about, and he wanted to convey to his audience, to the fans. It's obviously a promotional opportunity to let people know that new record is out there. So that's kind of the business end of it. But it truly is, when you strip it down, it's like if the artist doesn't have anything to say, it's like, it's going to be a hard job to get them to come in here and sit in front of a camera, But for the most part, they're creative people and they have things to say, and that's what we try to capture that along the way. And we, our weekly news shows, and we're constantly monitoring and out there talking to them. So there's a lot of that happens as well, where if they're on the road, they want the whole world to see how much fun they're having on the road, So we try to capture those things on the fly and out in the field, as we say. If you had told me that at this point, I would be working for MTV Networks doing what I'm doing, 20 years ago, I would have, sure, right, would have never believed it. So I guess I've always been, a music lover, played in the high school band, as typical of a lot of people. I think you'll find a lot of people behind the scenes. We have a lot of musicians at CMT. We have a ton of employees, so it's inevitable we will have that. But it's just the love of the music that really kind of got me there. I was fortunate to find a program that was actually close to home The university is Middle Tennessee State University. It's very well known for a recording industry management program. And myself, like a lot of other, there's quite a few people, a lot of other people in the business who studied there, and then there's an internship program, and so it's really, you have to kind of get in and be willing to work for nothing. It's the entertainment business, and I think this is probably true of LA or New York or wherever it is, and really got to want it and be passionate about it. I think as much as, artists, I say that about artists, it's like, man, you really got to want to be an artist, because there is a grind. It looks glamorous, but there's a grind when you're on the road that many days a year, and you make a lot of sacrifices, to put your creativity out there. So I guess, I basically got into it. I went to the university, I ended up getting a business degree and minored in recording industry management. I originally wanted to be a record producer. That was what I went, and I thought, man, I want to be a record producer. And then I realized, boy, there's not a lot of slots that come available for record producers. I mean, you can certainly be a sound engineer and you can work in the studio and all that, but those opportunities are they're hard to come by, and you really have to start at the bottom in most cases. Some of my friends that I went to school with who are record producers now, and they did the same thing. It's I think just wanting to just kind of, as you go through it, I've always had music video. That's common denominator in my particular career. I've been at CMT a couple of weeks ago now, 9 years, which seems like forever. Before that, I did a startup network for about 3 years. That was a music shopping concept, which was before its time. It was basically before you could go and buy music on the internet. So we were kind of doing the same thing. It was an interactive type of, trying to use traditional television, which at that point was, it wasn't really going to work. The idea was solid, and we actually utilized some of those ideas even to this day in our e-commerce and our .com world. And before that, I was in video promotions and marketing. So I was on the other side. I started out pitching. My first job in the business was working in a video promotions and PR company, and we were pitching artists. I pitched my predecessor, who was the director of programming. I used to market and pitch music videos to CMT, VH1, MTV. There's a lot of other outlets out there across the nation that utilize music videos, whether it be the scoreboards at the ball games that you see, or a guy with a regional show in Cincinnati, or Birmingham, or wherever. There's a lot of those guys that do local stuff, and we were basically marketing the artist through the music video. And I did that for a number of years, probably about 7 years, and so I kind of was on both sides of it. I tend to understand. I think I have a better understanding of when people come in to pitch us at CMT and want us to play their artists and what they're doing. It's like I've been on that side of the fence, so I kind of understand that a little bit better maybe than most. So I think you'd be amazed. I mean, I've got people that find a place to start, and sometimes if you're not if you're not in a major metro market and you don't feel like, well, I'm not in New York or LA or Nashville or Miami, those are obviously kind of key entertainment centers. There's a lot of other places. I mean, I think now, especially with in the digital age, there's opportunities. I mean, there's great websites and web design and things of that nature if you're more inclined to do that. But if you're in the music business, if you're specifically doing that, you're probably New York, Nashville, or LA. So maybe you have to at least find a way to that. But there are people who work at CMT, people I've hired that have come through. They started out at their local radio station in their hometown because it was a way to get closer to the music. And obviously, there's a radio station everywhere in America. It's like it's not like you're going to find a market without one. So, I've seen that happen. I've seen people start out and just in the smallest market possible, but because they really wanted to do it and want to be close to it, and they've kind of found opportunities to come closer to the center, I guess, or where it's made. I think it's like anything, though. I think it's your passion about it that people will hopefully, see. And it's also being honest with yourself to the extent that it's like, if it's really a driving force, in your life and you really want to do it, it's like, I know it's most people have to pay the bills and keep a roof over their head, but it's like at some point you got to go, okay, you know what, this is just a job. It's not a, if it's not a career, if it's not where I want to go, it's like you kind of have to make that tough decision of, I'm going to get out of this and try to move closer to, this entertainment business or whatever it may be. The one thing I would say is that there's no one way to get there. It's a myriad of paths.